Upon checking my phone, I saw that I had 13 missed calls. They were all from my mother-in-law, Martha. Not again. As I was pondering this, my phone vibrated once more. "Hello," I said upon answering the call. Martha raised her voice in anger. "Excuse me. Isn't the allowance for this month $3,000 due?" "Excuse me." I replied. I said send the allowance. This month's payment hasn't been deposited yet. Martha raged, completely disregarding my circumstances and only expressing her own desires. I'd had enough of her. Even in this situation, she doesn't reflect on her words and actions, does she? I've got no choice but to resort to my last option. I pulled myself together and blurted out to my phone, "Your son has passed away, so I can no longer send an allowance. My name is Jennifer Smith, 32 years old. I'm a busy working woman at a major financial firm and also a housewife. I got married about 2 years ago. I met my beloved husband Mark through our shared hobbies. He was kind to everyone, and I was attracted to his warm smile, quickly developing feelings for him. Apparently, he felt the same way, and after dating for a year, we immediately got engaged. We both believed that we wouldn't meet anyone better than each other. We were living together while dating, and without any major quarrels, we decided to marry. Everything went smoothly for us, but here's where a problem arose. Martha, my mother-in-law. My father-in-law had passed away a few years ago, and since Mark didn't have any siblings, his only family was Martha. The trouble started when I first visited her home to introduce myself before our wedding. "Nice to meet you," Martha said, clearly showing a displeased expression. "So, you're Mark's fiancée, huh?" "Yes, my name is Jennifer Miller." "You're a rather plain girl. I wonder what Mark sees in you, huh?" I couldn't tell if she was joking or seriously meant what she said. Having such words directed at me by the mother of my loved one, I was quite shocked. Seeing my state, Mark frowned at Martha. "Hey, Mom, what's with the sudden harsh words? How can you say such things to the person I chose?" "No, Mark, I'm just trying to choose a suitable woman for you." "Choose? I'm the one who chose her. You have no right to meddle." "Don't say it in such a cold way. I'm just telling the truth because I care about you. If you were really thinking of me, you'd simply support us. Why can't you understand such a simple thing?" The air turned heavy as an argument unfolded between mother and son right before my eyes. Given that this was my first meeting with Martha, I wasn't in a position to intervene. Although the atmosphere remained awkward, we ultimately managed to express our intent to marry. As we were leaving, Martha called out to Mark, sounding somewhat disgruntled, "Mark, can I have a word?" "You're going to keep that promise after you get married, right?" "What promise?" "You know about the allowance." "Ah, that. Yes. I'll be sure to take care of that. Can we not discuss it here, please?" "Well, I was just asking." Throughout, the atmosphere between my husband and his mother was tense, and the air was thick with discomfort. In the car on the way home, I asked Mark about the thing that had been bothering me. "Hey, Mark, about the conversation you had with your mom as we were leaving." "Yeah, I should have told you about it, Jennifer. I heard something about an allowance. After my dad passed away, I've been sending money to my mom every month." "How much?" $2,000. "What? $2,000? I couldn't help but raise my voice in surprise. He then sighed deeply and began to speak slowly. "Actually, my mom has a debt she lost a lot of money at a casino a long time ago. She's still paying it off, and because her health isn't great these days, she spends a lot of time at home. But she still needs money to live on, right?" "But $2,000? Isn't that a bit too much? If I try to lower the amount, she keeps calling me over and over. and no matter what, a mother is still a mother. I worry about her living alone." "I see. Mark is really devoted to his mother, but of course, that makes sense. Since his father passed away, Martha has been the only family he has left. Regardless of her character, she's still his beloved mother. At that time, I only thought of my husband as a kind person. 2 months after our wedding, during my lunch break one day, I received a phone call on my smartphone. The call was from Martha. When I answered with a hello, Martha began to speak in a cheerful tone. 'Jennifer, long time no see. Can we chat for a bit?' 'Yes. What can I do for you?' 'Well, I was hoping you could start sending me money.' 'Excuse me?' I was so taken aback, she couldn't find the words to respond. However, Martha seemed excited to continue the conversation. 'You mentioned before that you're working for a financial company, right? That means you have a good salary, doesn't it?' 'Well, not exactly.' 'What? You're lying to avoid giving me money. That's not what I mean.' 'Then what is it?' 'But Martha, you're still receiving financial support from Mark, aren't you?' To my question, Martha responded in defiance. 'So what?' Jennifer sternly stated what she felt. 'Martha, receiving $2,000 monthly support is a big deal, and yet you're asking for more.' 'Really? You think so? If you were to send me an additional $1,000, I could avoid burdening Mark. Do you understand? But aren't you using part of Mark's $2,000 to pay back the debt? I'm short. I haven't told Mark, but I have a significant amount of debt.' From Martha's tone, it was apparent that this was a fact. Even her husband was unaware of it. Having children in the future would increase our expenses. In addition to that, taking over Martha's debt was not an easy task. But if Martha's payments fall behind and the debt falls onto Mark, the interest will likely have accumulated significantly by that time. If I refuse to send money, it would eventually become a problem for my husband as well. It was better for Martha to pay off her debt now. Thinking along those lines, I reluctantly agreed to Martha's proposal. 'All right, I'll start sending you money.' 'Really? Good God, Jennifer, I knew you would say that. The total with Mark's contribution will be $3,000. But this means you can pay off your debt, right?' 'Yes, of course. I should be able to pay it all off in about a year.' 'You promise, right? You'll make sure to pay off all your debts.' 'I get it. So I'll be expecting it from this month onwards.' Martha ended the call abruptly. Physical exhaustion from work, combined with this emotional burden, only added to my stress. $1,000 a month, that's going to be rough. But it's also to prevent future problems for us. After all, if Martha can't make a living, it will upset Mark as well. That night, I promptly reported the matter to my husband. He told me I didn't have to do this, but I had already given my word to Martha, and it was a decision made for our future well-being. Mark expressed his gratitude and understanding, even as he maintained a sorry expression. Time flew by, and 2 years have passed since then. The financial aid we thought would end in a year is still ongoing. Even now, we are transferring $3,000 every month to Martha. What's more, about 2 months ago, Mark fell ill and has been unable to go to work. He's on sick leave, so he's receiving disability benefits, but it's a mere pittance compared to his previous salary. Last month, I managed to transfer $3,000 to Martha from my savings, but it would be very challenging if this situation continues. And unbelievably, Martha has not once come to visit her sick son. We have told her about his hospitalization, but she doesn't show up to see him and only contacts me to ask, "You're still sending the money, right?" I was so angry that I decided to confront Mark about the issue. "Mark, listen. Don't you think it's wrong that Martha is only concerned about money even though you're in such a state? We need to think seriously about what to do going forward. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. I don't want to put more strain on you, Jennifer. This month, too, she's been bombarding me with calls and messages asking if we sent the money yet. Are you serious? How can she only think about money when her own son is sick? Mark showed his anger at his mother, his face slightly worn. Then, as if he had an idea, Mark exclaimed, "That's it," and wore a sly grin. "What is it?" "Mark." "Well, this is our last resort. I've come up with something good." "Yeah, for my mom? What?" What Mark suggested was a plan I could never have imagined. Although it could be called inappropriate, that seemed to be the only way to make Martha understand. A few weeks later, Mark was discharged from the hospital. Martha didn't reply to any of our messages, so we didn't tell her. About Mark's discharge in the last 2 weeks, Martha has been relentlessly demanding the money. There's no point in sending money to a mother who doesn't even worry about her son. While Mark and I were enjoying a cup of tea, a message came in on my phone. Upon checking, I found 13 missed calls from Martha. Again, as I thought so, my phone vibrated again. It was another call from Martha. "Hello." I turned on the speaker microphone so that Mark could hear, and Martha started shouting right away. "Listen, where's the $3,000 for this month?" "Excuse me, that's right. The money for this month hasn't been transferred yet." "Martha, do you realize Mark is no?" "I don't care if he's in the hospital or whatever. It's none of my business. You're working at a good place, right? You must have plenty of savings. Hurry up and transfer it here." Martha was shouting angrily. Eventually, she said something unbelievable. "Listen, since you married Mark, if he can't pay, you have to pay me. Understand? If you refuse, I'll make you the guarantor. Got it?" At that moment, something inside me snapped. She was displaying her desires openly without considering our situation at all. I had reached my breaking point with her. She didn't even try to reflect on her actions. Now I had no choice but to resort to the last resort. I firmly declared into my smartphone, "Mark has passed away. I can't send you any more money." At these words, Martha blurted out, "What? Yes." This was the last resort that my husband suggested. Lie to Martha about Mark's death and observe her reaction. If she showed any sign of sadness, if she reflected on her behavior and apologized, we would continue to support her financially. But if she didn't reflect, if she demanded money, we would sever ties completely. Deep down, I thought that even a money-grubbing woman like Martha would deeply reflect on her actions if she were told that her own son had died. But the very next moment, Martha burst into loud laughter. "Yay! What's so funny?" Well, isn't it obvious? If Mark is dead, that means his inheritance will be distributed to me too. "Excuse me, I've been looking into it since I heard that Mark was sick." "Listen here, 2/3 of Mark's assets are yours, but 1/3 is mine." I was at a loss for words. I never thought that when she first heard that her son was sick, she wouldn't look into treatment, but into how the inheritance would be divided. My anger surpassed. I was simply dumbfounded. My husband seemed to feel the same way, and as our eyes met, he slowly nodded. This was the signal to continue with the plan. I once again said to Martha in a strong tone, "Martha, did you hear what I said? Mark is dead." "I heard. What about it? Aren't you sad your own son passed away before you? You just make sure to send me some. I won't let you get away with not doing it." With a click, the phone line was cut off, and a dial tone echoed. I glanced at my husband and saw that he was shaking, his face red with anger. "Mark, Are you okay?" As I asked, my husband looked into my eyes and said, "I'm cutting ties with her. She'll likely come here eventually demanding money. Let's wait until then, okay." "But are you really okay with this? Cutting off ties just like that?" "Yeah, I have no regrets. After that call, she's no mother." My husband's eyes were filled with hatred, and I felt the same way. A person who only thinks about money over her own son's life is not family to me. A few days later, as we expected, Martha came to our house. For the time being, I decided to hide my husband in the next room and deal with Martha myself. Then Martha approached me with a face like a demon. "Hey, give me Mark's inheritance right now." Again with that. Anything else to say? He's already dead, isn't he? It's pointless to say anything now. Yet you never even visited him. What are you saying? Are you really his mother? You're so annoying. Give me the inheritance right away. I don't mind getting a lawyer. Speaking more would be a waste of time. Just as I thought that, my husband emerged from the next room. Seeing him, Martha let out a startled gasp, as if she had seen a ghost. "Mark, why weren't you dead?" "Long time no see, Mom." "Sorry, but the news about my death was a lie." "A lie? How could you be so disrespectful?" "I wanted to confirm your true nature, Mom. I was curious about how you'd handle the allowance if I, your son, died. But you turned out to be a gold digger, just as I suspected." "I got that perfectly." "What? How dare you call your mother a gold digger?" Silence. I'm cutting ties with a toxic parent like you. Martha's mouth was agape at my husband's angry shouts. She could not come to terms with the fact that her own son was severing ties with her. What? What does this mean, Mark?" "It means exactly what I said. I can't consider someone like you as my mother." "No way. Then what about the allowance? Do you really think I would?" "You're on your own with the debts. We're moving." "Wait, please. If you do that, what about my living expenses?" Tearfully pleading, Martha reached out to my husband. He forcefully shook off her hand, looked at her coldly, and said, "I don't care about your living expenses. You have been living off us without even a single apology. I really understand your despicable nature now. Don't you dare show up in front of us again." "No, wait. Mark, are you going to abandon your mother?" Ignoring her words, my husband grabbed Martha's arm and dragged her to the front door. He threw her shoes and bag outside and chased Martha out of the house. Martha was making a fuss outside for a while, but disappeared after a bit, perhaps unable to withstand the eyes of the neighbors. She tried contacting us multiple times, but we ignored all of her attempts. We set Martha's number to be automatically rejected, and we finished moving. Regarding the matter of co-signing for the debts, it became invalid since Martha had made Mark the co-signer without his consent, and therefore he was not responsible. Without the allowance from us, Martha seems to be leading a miserable life. It's only natural, as she had been using the allowance for her gambling habits instead of paying off her debts. She still has a mountain of debts and is chased by debt collectors every day. She can't gamble anymore and seems to be working from dawn to dusk. For the foreseeable future, it's unlikely that she will be able to pay off her debts completely. She will have to keep working until she is unable to move. This is entirely her own doing. As for us, we are spending fulfilling days in our new home. My husband's condition has stabilized, and he has returned to work after some time. Now there's a new life growing in my belly. We're going to have an additional member in our family next year. From now on, we want to spend happy days as a family of 3.
I've always been a private person, happy to blend into the background rather than be the center of attention. My name is Rachel, and from a young age, I learned to be self-sufficient. My mom, ever observant, noticed this about me early on. Instead of encouraging me to be more outgoing, she fostered my independence, showing me how to take care of myself in ways that were both practical and meaningful. She taught me to cook when I could barely see over the counter. At first, it was just stirring, then chopping, then creating whole meals. But it was more than just cooking. It became my escape, a way to be creative and free. We'd visit new restaurants, and she'd describe each dish to me with the detail of a seasoned critic. I started to see food as an experience, not just sustenance. As I grew, my love for food became a passion for writing about it. Inspired by the critics we'd read together, I wanted others to taste each dish through my words. So I studied culinary arts and later took up journalism. My first job as a food critic was with a small magazine. I'll never forget the first review I wrote. It was for a quaint Italian restaurant, and people loved it. My editor called me in the next day saying, "Rachel, you've got something special. Keep this up." Years passed, and with each review I gained a following. I eventually branched out, starting my own blog and social media pages, where food lovers from all over the world followed my latest discoveries. Then one evening, at a new restaurant called The Grove, I met Eric. It started innocently. I noticed him glancing over at my notebook as I scribbled notes on the ambiance. He finally introduced himself, and soon we were talking about everything from the meal to favorite cities. His laughter was infectious, and before I knew it, he'd invited me to join him and his parents for dinner. I hesitated, but their warmth pulled me in. His parents, Mark and Linda, were thrilled to meet me, calling themselves food fanatics. We bonded over shared tastes, and I found myself enjoying the evening in a way I hadn't anticipated. Eric was charming, and our conversations flowed easily, like we'd known each other for years. By the time dessert arrived, I felt like part of their family. Eric and I began texting the next day, and what started as casual conversations turned into deep discussions about life, dreams, and everything in between. A month later, he asked me out. From there, things moved fast. Within a year, we were married. But marriage brought its own surprises. As much as I loved Eric, his parents became more involved in our lives than I'd expected. They would show up unannounced, join us on dinner dates, and even insert themselves into our weekend plans. Each time, I tried to be understanding. Family was important to Eric, and I wanted to respect that. But there were moments when it felt like I was married to his entire family, not just him. One afternoon, Eric suggested a weekend getaway. Just the two of us, he promised. Excited, I packed a picnic, eager for a quiet escape. But when we arrived at the cozy lakeside cabin, I saw Mark and Linda unpacking their bags beside us. "Surprise," Linda said, pulling me into a hug. "We thought we'd join you for some family time." I looked at Eric, waiting for an explanation, but he just shrugged. "It's a family tradition," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. My heart sank. This wasn't what I'd signed up for. The weekend felt more like a family reunion than a romantic getaway, and while I tried to put on a brave face, the disappointment lingered. Back home, I confronted Eric. "We need boundaries," I said. He agreed, saying he'd talk to his parents. For a while, things seemed to improve. But then came the vacation. Eric had planned it months in advance, a week at a beautiful beach resort. I was thrilled at the thought of uninterrupted time together, but on the morning of our departure, as we loaded our suitcases into the car, I heard familiar voices. "Oh, don't worry about our luggage," Linda chirped, dragging a small carry-on bag. "We'll just pick up what we need once we get there." I looked at Eric in disbelief. "I thought you said this was our vacation." He hesitated, then mumbled, It's a family thing." The first few days, I tried to focus on the positives, the ocean, the sunsets, the local cuisine, but it was hard to ignore how much Mark and Linda spent each day, never seeming to worry about the cost. They'd pick the priciest items on every menu, dragging us to upscale shops and fancy restaurants. One evening, I leaned over to Eric, whispering, "How can your parents afford all this?" Aren't they on a fixed income? He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes glued to his plate. They're just good with money, he muttered. But something felt off. When we returned home, I decided to check our joint account. My stomach dropped when I saw the balance. It was shockingly low. I felt a cold wave of anger as I called Eric over, demanding an explanation. I might have covered a few expenses, he admitted, unable to meet my gaze. Mom and Dad just needed a little help. I was speechless. Eric, that was our money. You should have asked me first. He looked contrite, promising it wouldn't happen again. For a while, he kept his word. But a few months later, things took a darker turn. One evening, as I prepared for a review at an upscale restaurant, Eric's parents showed up again, taking seats at my table as if they belonged there. Linda loudly introduced herself to the staff, insisting on ordering the most expensive items. I was mortified, watching as she claimed they were with the food critic. Linda, I whispered sharply, I'm here to work. You can't just show up like this. But she ignored me, raising her voice to announce that family of food critics should get the perks too. I could feel the stares of other diners as the tension grew. The head waiter approached, visibly uncomfortable, and I knew I had to act. Linda, you need to leave, I said firmly. This is my job, and you're jeopardizing it. Linda's face twisted in anger. Is this how you treat family? She spat. I'm the one who told Eric to marry you. I thought you'd be good for us. But if this is how you repay us, maybe we don't need you. She stormed out, Mark trailing behind, leaving me to explain the scene to the head waiter. I couldn't believe it. Had my marriage been built on an illusion? When I confronted Eric, he admitted the painful truth. Yes, my mom encouraged me. She saw your career, thought it would benefit us. But Rachel, I fell in love with you. I wanted to believe him, but the cracks in our relationship were too deep. Trust was shattered, and each day felt like a battle to hold on to what little remained. For weeks, I considered my options, feeling trapped between love and betrayal. Then one day, I received an offer to publish my first cookbook. It was a dream come true. But as I celebrated, I couldn't ignore the shadow hanging over me, the lingering doubts about my marriage and the intrusion of Eric's family. Eric tried to mend things, promising me a trip to celebrate just the two of us. But as we prepared to board, I spotted Mark and Linda waving excitedly. I felt my heart break as Eric muttered, "Mom found out." In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I stepped off the train platform, watching as it pulled away. My phone buzzed with messages from Eric. I've always hated how you're just lounging around all day, not working or earning a cent, Miranda, my mother-in-law, shouted at me, waving a kitchen knife dangerously close. My heart pounded like a drum. I feared she might really kill me. Why don't you say something? She snarled, stepping closer, her eyes cold and furious. Please, Miranda, put down the knife. I'm begging you, I managed to say, my voice trembling. It wasn't me who wasn't earning. It was Frank, my husband, who hadn't brought in a dime. But now, as Miranda came toward me, I had no choice but to leave. 2 years ago, I moved in with Frank and his mother after my father-in-law's sudden passing. Karen, I'm really grateful you decided to move into my parents' house. Thank you, Frank had told me. At the time, it felt like the right choice, a chance to help out while Frank looked for work after losing his job. If you want, feel free to stay here. It's better than struggling in an apartment, Miranda had suggested shortly after her husband's funeral. Frank was eager to take her up on it, as the house was spacious and moving would save us money. Despite my worries, I hadn't known Miranda very well. I took the plunge. In the beginning, things were comfortable. We led a simple life, and on weekends, Frank and I could even go out on dates, something we hadn't done since our financial problems began. I began to feel like maybe we could make this arrangement work. I put my fears aside and decided to make the best of it. But only 3 months into our new arrangement, Miranda's behavior began to change. "Karen, you're living in my house, yet you don't even bother doing the cleaning or laundry?" she snapped one evening. I did clean, almost every day after work, but Miranda kept finding fault. Her tone grew more demanding, her attitude harsher. "You're supposed to take care of everything since you're staying here. Wasn't it you who wanted to move in?" she continued, her words cutting like a blade. From then on, life became a nightmare. Miranda harassed me daily, demanding I do all the household chores without any rest, even after long days at work. Her criticisms never stopped, and eventually, the mental strain broke me down. Frank, meanwhile, didn't seem to care. He ignored the tension between Miranda and me, brushing it off as something I should handle on my own. One day, I couldn't even get out of bed due to a high fever. "Miranda, I'm really sick. Could you please help with the housework today?" I asked, barely able to speak. "What? You want me to do it? Don't be ridiculous. A cold is no excuse. Get up and work," she barked. Too ill to argue, I forced myself out of bed and tried to keep up, but I ended up vomiting from exhaustion. Later, while I was trying to catch my breath on the living room sofa, Miranda hit me, forcing me back up. "You have no time to rest. Get moving," she yelled. I looked to Frank for help, but he just shrugged and avoided eye contact. "I'm busy," he muttered before disappearing into another room. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a house where no one cared whether I lived or died. Things came to a head one morning when I couldn't go to work because I was still too weak. Miranda noticed my car was still parked outside. "Why aren't you at work?" she demanded. "I'm still sick. I took a day off," I said, hoping for some sympathy. Instead, her face twisted in rage. "You're just a lazy leech, aren't you? Not earning anything and just sleeping all day. Get out of my house." She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and pointed it at me, her eyes filled with fury. My body froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I felt death was just moments away. Finally, I found my voice. "Okay, I'll leave. Just please put the knife down," I pleaded. "Then leave now," she screamed, still clutching the knife. Frank, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room and intervened, managing to get Miranda to lower the knife. That was my chance. I ran to my car and drove away, heading for my parents' house. As I drove, a mix of anger and fear welled up inside me. I had tolerated too much from Miranda and Frank. Brandishing a knife at me was crossing a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I stopped at a nearby grocery store parking lot and called the police, reporting what had just happened. I didn't want to go back to that house. Not now, not ever. The police took my report over the phone, and I told them about all the times Miranda had assaulted me. They promised to visit the house to speak with her. Afterward, I continued my journey to my parents' home, hoping I'd finally be safe. That night, I ignored several missed calls from both Miranda and Frank. I didn't want anything to do with either of them. When I finally picked up, Miranda screamed at me, demanding I come back. "You left Frank. You called the police on me," she shouted. "You told me to leave while threatening me with a knife," I replied. "I'm not coming back." Frank called next, asking me to reconsider the divorce I'd mentioned in anger. He said he was trying to find work, but I'd heard it all before. I had no reason to trust him anymore. The next day, divorce papers arrived at my parents' home. I signed them without hesitation. A few weeks later, I received a call from the police. "Miranda has been arrested for threatening you with a knife," the officer informed me. "She wants to settle. What do you want to do?" "No way. I'm not settling," I said. I was done with Miranda and her toxic influence. Hearing that she'd been arrested felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Soon after, Frank showed up at my parents' home, pleading with me to return. He claimed he couldn't make ends meet without my income. It was pathetic, really. A grown man begging me to support him when he still had no job. I told him to leave and not come back, but he kept returning week after week, sometimes yelling from the doorstep, One day, during one of his desperate visits, I had enough. "If you come here again, I'll call the police," I shouted, finally losing my patience. A week later, he called me, threatening to kill both himself and me if I didn't return. That was it. I reported him to the police. Frank was arrested shortly thereafter, and with him and Miranda both in jail, I finally felt some semblance of peace. I knew it wasn't over. They could come back once they were released, so my parents and I decided to move. Safety was more important than staying in the same home. 2 years later, I remarried a kind man I met through work. Unlike Frank, he was hardworking, considerate, and supportive. We were expecting a child, and I couldn't have been happier. Life with Frank and Miranda had been nothing but hardship. But now, with a loving partner by my side, I finally looked forward to a brighter future. Every day felt like a fresh start, and I began to appreciate the small joys of life, cooking meals together, decorating the nursery, and planning our future. My new husband treated me with the love and respect I had always longed for. He understood my past without judgment and promised me that our home would always be a safe space. But sometimes, late at night, I still thought about Miranda and Frank. I wondered if they had learned anything during their time in jail. Would they change, or were they still the same toxic people I had left behind? I hoped they had learned, but I wasn't willing to find out. My parents and I had moved far enough away that no one from my past knew where to find us. We had new phone numbers, new jobs, and a new beginning. I had even started taking online classes, something I had put off for years while dealing with the stress of my previous life. It felt good to do something for myself for a change. My husband and I would often take long walks in the evenings, discussing baby names and dreaming about the future. He knew what I had been through, and he was determined to help me build a better life. I felt loved, cherished, and most importantly, safe. One day, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Frank's. My heart skipped a beat and a chill ran down my spine. I debated whether or not to open it. After all this time, why was he contacting me now? Against my better judgment, I tore the envelope open and began to read. Frank's words were desperate, pleading. He said he had changed, that he was a different man now, and that he wanted me to give him another chance. He wrote about how lonely he was, how hard it had been without me, and how much he regretted everything that had happened. I put the letter down, my hands trembling. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the man I had once loved. But that sadness quickly turned into anger. Frank had made his choices, and he had to live with the consequences. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him drag me back into that dark place. That night, I talked to my husband about the letter. He held me close and reassured me that I was safe. "You don't have to respond," he said gently. "You owe him nothing." And he was right. I owed Frank nothing. Not my time, not my sympathy, and certainly not my forgiveness. The next morning, I shredded the letter and threw it away. It was time to let go of the past completely. I had a new life, a new family on the way, and a future that was bright and full of promise. There was no room for Frank or Miranda in that future. Months passed, and our baby was born, a beautiful, healthy little girl. As I held her in my arms, I knew that everything I had endured had led me to this moment. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty. It had all been worth it to get here. I looked down at my daughter and promised her that she would always be safe, that she would always be loved, and that no one would ever make her feel the way I had been made to feel. With my husband by my side, we left the hospital as a family, ready to start this new chapter together. The past was behind us, and the future was ours to write. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.
"You're serious?" I said, my voice trembling as I stared at Richard from across the living room. "You want me to give you $3,000, on top of the $4,000 I already give you every month?" He leaned back in his recliner, folding his arms over his chest like a king issuing an order. "I need a new car," he said, his tone clipped and matter-of-fact. "The old one's falling apart. I don't see what the big deal is. You've got the money." I felt my chest tighten. "The big deal, Richard, is that I've already sacrificed enough for this household. I cover the bills, the groceries, your utilities. I even helped pay off Adam's credit cards. Now you want me to buy you a car?" "Yes," he said, his voice rising. "Because I deserve it. I've done enough for this family. It's time for you to pull your weight." Pull my weight. The words hit me like a slap. I'd been financially supporting this household for years, working tirelessly to keep us afloat while my father-in-law and my husband, Adam, treated my paycheck like a bottomless ATM. And now, the one time I set a boundary, Richard had the audacity to call me selfish. "I'm not doing it," I said firmly, standing my ground. "You'll have to figure out another way." His face twisted with rage, the vein in his forehead bulging. "You're just like your mother, always thinking you're better than everyone else." He stood abruptly, his movements sharp and aggressive. "Don't you dare disrespect me in my own house." "Your house?" I shot back, my voice shaking. "This house is paid for with my money, Richard." Before I could react, he lunged forward, shoving me with both hands. I felt my feet slip on the hardwood floor, and then I was tumbling down the stairs. The world blurred as pain shot through my body. I landed hard at the bottom, my arm twisted beneath me and my head pounding from the impact. For a moment, I couldn't move. The pain was overwhelming, and tears stung my eyes as I tried to catch my breath. Above me, Richard stood at the top of the stairs, his face still contorted with anger. "That's what happens when you don't respect me," he spat, before turning and stomping back into the living room. I expected Adam to rush to my side, to help me up or at least ask if I was okay. But when he appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression was blank, almost bored. "You should have just given him the money, Maya," he said with a shrug. "You know how he gets." My name is Maya, and for the past 4 years I've been the financial backbone of a household that doesn't respect me. I married Adam because I thought we were building a life together, but it quickly became clear that his priorities were tied to his father, Richard. When Richard's health began to decline, I agreed to move into his home to help out. What I didn't realize was that helping out meant funding everything: rent, utilities, food, and even Richard's personal expenses. At first, I thought it was temporary. I told myself that Adam and Richard appreciated what I was doing, even if they didn't always say it. But as time went on, their sense of entitlement grew. Adam stopped working entirely, claiming he needed to be home to support his father. Richard, meanwhile, began making bigger and bigger demands, treating my paycheck like it belonged to him. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was for the good of the family. But lying at the bottom of those stairs, bruised and aching, I realized the truth. This wasn't a family. It was a one-sided arrangement where my value was measured solely by what I could give, and I was done. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't say a word to Adam or Richard as I grabbed my things and walked out the door. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination, the sting of their betrayal still fresh. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I checked into a motel and sat on the edge of the bed, my phone clutched in my hands. I could feel the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me, but I wasn't going to let it break me. For years, I had been their safety net, their source of stability. Without me, they'd fall apart, and this time I wasn't going to catch them. The next morning, I made the call. "Angela," I said when the lawyer answered, "I need your help. It's about my husband and his father." Meeting Angela, my lawyer, felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in years. She listened carefully as I explained everything, how I'd been covering all the household expenses, how Richard had demanded more money for a car, and how the confrontation had ended with me at the bottom of the stairs. "You've been financially supporting your husband and father-in-law entirely on your own?" Angela asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. For the past 4 years. Every bill, every expense, everything comes out of my pocket. And your name is on the mortgage or deed of the house? She asked, flipping through her notes. It's all in my name, I said, my voice firm. They couldn't qualify for the loan without me. I pay for it. I own it. Angela's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Then this is your house, Maya, not theirs. We'll start with eviction papers for both of them. The thought of evicting Adam and Richard made my stomach churn with a mix of guilt and satisfaction. For years, I'd put their needs above my own, convincing myself that I was doing the right thing. But that night on the stairs, I realized that kindness and loyalty meant nothing to people who only saw me as a means to an end. What about Richard pushing me? I asked. He could have seriously hurt me. We'll include that in the lawsuit, Angela said firmly. You're not just evicting them, you're holding them accountable for their behavior. Let's make sure you get justice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Angela helped me gather all the evidence I needed to support my case. Bank statements, receipts, even text messages where Richard and Adam made their entitled demands. Seeing everything laid out in black and white was both validating and infuriating. For years, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting, that things weren't as bad as they seemed. But the numbers didn't lie. I'd poured tens of thousands of dollars into that house, while Adam and Richard contributed nothing but complaints and criticism. Angela also encouraged me to document the incident on the stairs. We'll need to show that there's a history of abusive or threatening behavior, she said. This isn't just about money. It's about creating a safe environment for you moving forward. Safe. The word hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd put my safety, both emotional and physical, on the back burner, prioritizing the needs of others. Now, for the first time, I was fighting for myself. Meanwhile, I started making quiet plans to rebuild my life. I found a small apartment close to my job and began moving my things there in secret, one carload at a time. The house still felt like a minefield, and I avoided Adam and Richard as much as possible. Adam barely noticed my absence. He spent most of his time glued to the couch or arguing with his father about God knows what. Richard, meanwhile, was still fuming over my refusal to buy him a car. Every interaction with him felt like walking a tightrope, but I held my ground. The final piece of the puzzle was setting up the legal bombshell they'd never see coming. Angela drafted eviction papers which would force them to vacate the house within 30 days, and a civil lawsuit for damages related to the assault and financial exploitation. They're not going to take this well, she warned. Be prepared for some backlash. I'm ready, I said, my resolve hardening. They've pushed me around for too long. The hardest part was keeping my plans to myself. My coworkers noticed that I seemed distracted, but I brushed off their concerns with vague excuses about stress at home. The truth was, I felt like I was living a double life. One version of me was still playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, while the other was quietly reclaiming her independence. Late at night, I'd lie awake in my new apartment, replaying everything that had happened. The anger and hurt would bubble up, threatening to overwhelm me. But then I'd think about the moment I'd serve them the papers. I pictured their faces, Richard's smug confidence shattering, Adam's indifference replaced with disbelief, and it gave me the strength to keep going. The day finally came. Angela met me at the house, her calm professionalism grounding me as we walked up the driveway. My heart raced as she rang the doorbell, the stack of papers in her hand feeling heavier than it should. Richard opened the door, his expression immediately souring when he saw me standing beside Angela. "What do you want?" he snapped. Angela didn't miss a beat. "Mr. Williams, you've been served," she said, handing him the papers. "You and your son are required to vacate this property within 30 days. Additionally, my client is filing a civil lawsuit against you for damages related to assault and financial exploitation." "What the hell is this?" Richard barked, his face turning red as he flipped through the documents. "You can't do this. This is my house." "No," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "It's my house, and you're not welcome here anymore." Adam appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken up. "What's going on?" he mumbled. Richard shoved the papers at him. Your wife thinks she can kick us out. Can you believe this? Adam skimmed the documents, his brow furrowing. Maya, this is insane. You can't just... I can, I interrupted, meeting his gaze. And I did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and I could see the panic starting to creep into their expressions. This wasn't just an argument they could brush off or a demand they could guilt me into meeting. This was real, and they couldn't stop it. Angela turned to leave, motioning for me to follow. They've been served, she said. Let's go. As I walked away, the weight of years of mistreatment seemed to lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt eerily quiet as I sat in my car parked across the street, watching Angela walk up to the door one final time. She'd insisted on being the one to deliver the formal lawsuit and eviction enforcement notice. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when Richard and Adam would finally realize the gravity of what they had done. I saw Angela ring the doorbell and stand confidently with the papers in hand. Moments later, Richard opened the door, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion, and finally to pure, unadulterated rage. Even from my car, I could hear his voice erupt. This is ridiculous, he bellowed, his fists clenched at his sides. She can't do this to me. I've lived in this house for years. Angela's voice remained calm and professional. Mr. Williams, as I explained the last time we served you, this property belongs solely to my client, Maya. You've had your 30-day notice, and as of today, you are legally required to vacate. Any refusal to comply will result in further legal action. Adam appeared behind him, his hair disheveled and his face still puffy with sleep. He squinted at the papers Angela handed him and groaned. Maya, seriously? What is all this? Angela didn't flinch. This is a civil lawsuit for damages totaling $20,000, including compensation for the physical assault, financial exploitation, and emotional distress caused by both Mr. Williams and Mr. Adam Williams. These proceedings will move forward regardless of whether you vacate today. Richard's face turned beet red, and I could see the anger boiling over. He snatched the papers from Adam's hands and ripped them in half, tossing the pieces onto the porch. You think this is going to scare me? He shouted. You can't evict family. This is my house. Angela didn't blink. That's for the court to decide, Mr. Williams. But for now, the sheriff's department will be here shortly to ensure that the eviction is carried out. Richard slammed the door in her face, but not before I caught a glimpse of Adam standing behind him, wide-eyed and panicked. For the first time, he seemed to grasp that this wasn't just another argument that could be smoothed over. This was real, and there was no way out. Angela returned to the car, her steps purposeful as she slid into the passenger seat. They're fuming, she said with a wry smile. But I doubt they'll try anything stupid. The sheriff will handle it from here. I exhaled a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For years, I'd been the one stuck in the cycle of giving in, of letting their entitlement, abuse, and disregard wear me down. But now, for the first time, I was the one holding the power. It felt foreign, but it also felt good. As we waited for the sheriff, I allowed myself to imagine the scene inside the house. Richard pacing furiously, ranting about how unfair this all was. Adam probably slumped on the couch, scrolling through his phone to avoid engaging. Their dynamic had always been the same. Richard barking orders, Adam following along, and me cleaning up the mess. But not anymore. When the sheriff's car pulled up, Richard stormed outside, yelling at the officers about how he'd been wronged. She's lying, he shouted. This is my house. I've lived here for decades. She can't just throw me out like this. The lead officer calmly reviewed the paperwork Angela handed him. This property is legally in Ms. Maya's name, and these eviction proceedings are valid, he said firmly. You've been given ample notice, Mr. Williams. You need to gather your belongings and vacate immediately. I won't, Richard roared, his voice hoarse with fury. You'll have to drag me out of here. Adam finally stepped outside, holding a hastily packed duffel bag. He looked at me from across the street, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why are you doing this, Maya?" he called out. "We're family." That word, family, cut through me like a knife. They'd used it as a weapon for years, twisting its meaning to justify their entitlement and disrespect, but I refused to let it hold me hostage any longer. I stepped out of the car, meeting Adam's gaze with a calm I didn't know I had. "Family doesn't push you down the stairs," I said, my voice steady. "Family doesn't take your money and treat you like you owe them everything. This house is mine, my life is mine, and I won't let either of you take anything more from me." Richard shouted something incoherent from the porch, but I didn't hear him. My focus was on Adam, who stared at me for a long moment before finally lowering his eyes. For once, he had no comeback, no excuses. He slung the duffel bag over his shoulder and trudged down the driveway without another word, his father still fuming behind him. The sheriff's officers escorted Richard back inside to gather his belongings, and Angela placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You've done it," she said quietly. "This chapter is over." As I watched Adam and Richard leave the house for the last time, I felt a surge of emotions, relief, pride, and an overwhelming sense of freedom. This wasn't just a victory in court, it was a victory for myself. For the first time in years, I'd stood up to the people who had tried to diminish me, and I'd won. I turned to Angela, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let's go," I said. "I've got a life to rebuild." The house felt so much larger once Richard and Adam were gone. As I walked through the quiet rooms, I was struck by how different everything seemed. Without their constant presence, the space that had once felt suffocating now felt like a blank canvas, a place I could finally reclaim as my own. The sheriff had left a short while ago, taking with him the last traces of their entitlement. Richard had resisted until the very end, ranting about how unfairly he'd been treated, but there was nothing left for him to cling to. Adam had been quieter, a shadow of the man who'd once promised to build a life with me. Watching him leave, dragging his duffel bag down the driveway, had been bittersweet. I felt no anger anymore, only pity. Angela stayed with me as I locked the front door. "You've done something not many people have the courage to do," she said, her tone warm. "It's hard to walk away from people you've invested so much in, even when they don't deserve it." I nodded, her words sinking in. "I think I finally realized it wasn't just about the money," I said. "It was about taking back control. For years I let them make me feel like I didn't have a choice, like I owed them everything. But I don't owe them anything." Over the next few days, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I changed the locks on the house and hired a cleaning service to help scrub away the physical reminders of Richard and Adam's presence. It felt symbolic, almost therapeutic, to erase the mess they'd left behind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. Friends and coworkers reached out to check on me, offering words of encouragement and support. "You're amazing for standing up for yourself," Lily said over coffee one afternoon. "It would have been so easy to just keep putting up with it, but you didn't." "I think I just reached a breaking point," I admitted. When Adam told me I should have given Richard the money, I realized he didn't care about me at all. And if he didn't care, then why was I giving so much of myself to him? Lily nodded. "It's hard to see that when you're in it, but you're out now. That's what matters." Richard and Adam tried to contact me once, but I ignored their calls. Angela assured me that they had no legal grounds to challenge the eviction or the lawsuit. "You've already won," she said, and I believed her. For the first time in years, I felt untouchable. My focus shifted to the future. I started exploring new career opportunities and hobbies I'd put on hold for far too long. Without the weight of their demands, I had the time and energy to invest in myself. I even began considering selling the house, my house, and moving somewhere new, somewhere that didn't carry the ghosts of the past. One evening, as I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, I let myself reflect on the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, far from it. But every step, every painful moment, had taught me something about my own strength. I'd spent years letting others define my worth, but not anymore. I looked out at the quiet street, the stars just beginning to dot the sky. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. This was my life, and I was finally living it on my terms. A few months later, my life had completely transformed. The house I once shared with Richard and Adam no longer felt like a prison. It was mine now, truly mine. Every corner, every room, reflected the life I was rebuilding for myself. The walls that used to echo with their demands and entitlement were now filled with peace and quiet. I'd finally put the house on the market, a decision that felt symbolic of closing that chapter for good. Angela helped me navigate the legal and financial hurdles, and the lawsuit against Richard was progressing in my favor. The compensation I stood to gain wasn't just about the money. It was about holding him accountable. Knowing that he would face consequences for his actions was its own kind of closure. In my new apartment, everything felt lighter. Without the constant burden of their expectations weighing me down, I finally had the time and energy to focus on myself. I took up yoga, started painting again, and even planned a trip to a quiet coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just surviving. The people in my life noticed the change. "You look happier," Lily said during one of our coffee dates. "Like a weight's been lifted." "Because it has," I said with a smile. For years I thought walking away meant giving up. But now I realize it was the bravest thing I've ever done. She raised her cup in a mock toast. "To brave new beginnings." "To never settling for less," I added, clinking my cup against hers. Richard and Adam's absence no longer haunted me. I stopped replaying the events of that night on the stairs or wondering if I'd done the right thing. I knew I had. They'd tried to make me feel small, but in the end, their actions had only made me stronger. I didn't need their apologies or explanations to move on. I'd built a new life, one they had no part in, and that was enough. The lawsuit's final judgment came a few weeks later. Richard was ordered to pay damages, and though I doubted he'd ever willingly accept responsibility, the ruling gave me closure. It was a legal acknowledgement of everything I'd endured, a confirmation that my story mattered. On the day I handed over the keys to the house's new owners, I stood in the empty living room one last time, letting the memories wash over me. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was all still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had taken back my power, and in doing so, I had found myself again. As I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead was open and full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of a story entirely my own,